So can you tell us about DocuSign and how it has transformed itself post-COVID in the digital era?
Yes, so DocuSign has really pioneered this concept of e-signature, which is the ability for any party to come together and execute an agreement purely electronically. So I think there's a few things that have happened. Last 3 years during the pandemic, the entire world has changed the way that business gets done in so many ways. There's not an option any longer to be remote or distributed. That is a new standard. So DocuSign's technology was really at the heart of how, not just in the US, but globally, companies were able to transact and do business with each other. So just to give you some sense, in terms of revenue, pre-pandemic, DocuSign had somewhere around 500 to 800 million in revenue. Just 36 months later, post-pandemic, it's $2.5 billion company.
Oh, a big jump.
Yeah, so you're seeing a 4 to 5x growth. And today, there have been over 1 billion people throughout the world who have either signed or sent a document using DocuSign. And in many ways, it's still very early because in countries like the US and in North America, it's a very common accepted standard to use e-signature. But even today, in developed countries, Germany, France, UK, even Japan, the penetration of e-signature is still in single-digit percentages. And so this is just one of the company's products, but in many ways, the whole world has yet to fully adopt this way of doing business. So it's an exciting time because so much of the change has yet to come, especially when you look at it in the global sense.
Are these legally valid in all the platforms, all the systems in the government?
Yeah, so one of the roles that DocuSign has played is with lobbying and legislation to educate governments around the effectiveness of e-signature, because in many ways it's almost more authentic and valid because you can trace back to the device something was signed on, the exact location something was signed, the exact time. So you have a lot of data that associates with an e-signature. It's not just the signature itself, but everything behind that. And so the security is obviously a big focus for the company. And in many countries, in most countries around the world, e-signature is now either accepted, developed countries accepted, or it's in the early stages of being accepted. In Europe, for example, there's a standard called EIDAS, E-I-D-A-S, and the European Union has said instead of each country developing their own standards, let's establish a European Union country-wide standard called EIDAS. This has just happened in the last couple of years. So in many ways, it's still early, I think, for legislation to pass in many of these countries. But in other areas like the United States, Canada, Australia, there's long-established standards. So it depends really on the country itself.
I personally use a lot of DocuSign.
Oh, good. Thank you for being a customer. One thing we've discovered is there's a lot of activity that happens before signature, and there's a lot of activity that happens post-signature. And so it's almost like a journey from creating an agreement, reviewing and negotiating an agreement, finalizing the agreement, then you have signature. For large companies, they may have hundreds, often thousands or tens of thousands of agreements. So there's a lot of information included in an agreement. And one of the areas we're investing a lot is on AI in order to be able to facilitate and orchestrate that whole journey. And then in the end, when a company might have hundreds or thousands of agreements, it's being able to ask simple questions across that whole data set and being able to learn, when do my agreements expire? When is revenue due? So there's a lot of innovation coming in the next few years around this category.
So I wanted to ask you about India, where under Prime Minister Modi, a lot of digitization has happened. A lot of countries are praising about India's digitization effort. Where does India stand in terms of these digital signatures?
Um, I have to do more research. I just joined the company 90 days ago, but there is an Indian government standard to authorize and allow e-signature technology to be present. Um, my understanding is all of that legislation has come under Narendra Modi's administration.
Mhm.
And I think it's just one indication of how technology and adopting technology, not only for government, but just at large, has really changed under Prime Minister Modi's leadership in the last several years. And so we're actually so excited about that DocuSign has just announced and committed to building a full engineering center and development center in India to start with, based out of Bangalore. But we're really excited about the market, not just because of the employee base we'll build there, but also because of the market opportunity for DocuSign.
How big the market opportunity is for you in India?
Look, there's well over 1 billion people in India, and mobile is the predominant way in which most people communicate, and it's a very mobile-centric culture. DocuSign's growth really accelerated a decade ago with the advent of wider adoption of mobile devices. So I don't have exact market size, but I know it's big enough where we're going to make a sizable investment so we can grow the business there in India over the coming years.
Before I come to Prime Minister visit to the US, I'd like to ask you, how does the AI or recent developments has made any impact on DocuSign or similar organizations, e-signatures?
Yeah, AI specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a few areas. So one is um, something we've just released called summarization. Oftentimes agreements are simple, but other times they can be actually quite complicated. You can imagine a legal agreement that has dozens of pages, dozens of clauses, sometimes hundreds of clauses. So our new summarization technology is based on AI. And if you receive an agreement, you can imagine just clicking one button, and you click that button and you'll get immediately the most important points and things you need to understand from that agreement, summarized in plain English, or any language for that matter. And so it really helps simplify the ability to review and understand the terms and clauses of an agreement. Now you can go to the next stage and you could say, take me section by section of an agreement and help me understand how to interpret each section in more detail. So that's an advanced form of document summarization. Now, where this is going is really having the intelligence to facilitate a negotiation. So if you want to take certain terms and respond to the sender, or the sender wants to send something to the signer, you can imagine simply changing the terms in plain English and dynamically having auto red lines in the document, just as if you had a lawyer sitting next to you or an attorney helping you manage that. Now, this isn't intended to replace a lawyer, but it has that kind of power. And so we're building something called ALM, which is our agreement language model, which is an AI capability to really help specifically improve the way agreements come to get signed. And then post-signature, there's the ability to look through hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of agreements and proactively summarize for a company what is it that they need to know today. Are documents or agreements up for renewal? Are there payments that need to be collected? So we're moving from a very tacit knowledge, fixed knowledge, often things trapped in PDF documents, to active knowledge, and to be able to understand from all of these agreements exactly the business decisions that need to get made. So this is just the beginning. AI is going to play a really powerful role in the next few years. One demo that our engineering team showed me was really interesting. This is a US-based example, but let's say you have a vendor in California and a buyer or a company in Washington, D.C., right? And the company in California sends a contract to Washington, D.C. The buyer in D.C. says, I am in full agreement with all of these terms, except this is a California state contract. I want something based in Washington, D.C.'s, whatever the standards may be.
Right.
You could click one button and instantly all the terms of the contract would stay the same, but the whole thing would flip to a Washington, D.C.
Comply to
compliant
the DC laws.
agreement. Exactly. So these are the kinds of things that will save hundreds of thousands of hours in a given year, right, for companies that may be looking to just do simple things like that. AI will be able to, in our agreement language models, will be able to help facilitate that.
Coming to India and India under Prime Minister Modi, what is your impression about that? How things have changed the last 9-10 years?
Well, I've been lucky to be in multiple companies where we've had deep investments in India. One is at eBay, where we had made a big acquisition in India many years ago and opened our India development centers, eBay and PayPal. My last company, Atlassian, which is an Australian-based company, but we now have close to 2,500 employees in India. And DocuSign, which we haven't opened our office yet, but it's coming this year. And what I'll say in every one of those examples, compared to even a decade or more ago, it's becoming a lot more easier for global companies to establish a footprint there, especially in these technology zones. In particular, my companies have been in Chennai, Bangalore, or Hyderabad, and it's no longer just a cost factor, but really access to talent. Some of the best talent in each of these companies, and hopefully now at DocuSign, comes out of as a result of our footprint in India. And my sense is that under the Modi administration, attracting foreign direct investment from technology companies has been a big focus, and certainly we've benefited quite a bit from that.
Anything that he needs to do further to improve India's digital environment or business-friendly environment?
I think it's from a large company perspective, probably quite easy. I know that small to mid-sized companies still struggle. We have a lot of, in my last company, Atlassian, we had a network of partners that were much smaller companies, but they would build their technology in our platform. And they attempted to also build an India footprint, oftentimes to get software development cycles going 24 hours. And I've heard firsthand from at least one of them that they struggled because as a smaller company of maybe under 500 or under 1,000 employees, they found it a lot more difficult to get established and get a footprint in India. So I'm guessing, this is secondhand, that there's still a lot more efficiency to be had for companies that may not have the resources of a publicly traded company to get started and to do business in India. That's just my sense. So I think there's still ways to go before it is truly frictionless. Yeah.
That was as an IT head. How about as an Indian American? How do you see India now? How does the Indian American look at Prime Minister Modi?
I mean, I was born in the U.S., a family from India, and everything I've sensed is that it's only gotten easier to do business and transact with India. I remember in the 1980s and 1990s, it would almost be impossible because of such constraints on capital flows and legislation and regulation. I think that made it really difficult for foreign companies to do business in India without partners. I sense that a lot of that friction that I remember is gone. And I think a lot of that is a result of more business-friendly banking regulation, more willingness to attract foreign investment. So personally speaking, every 5 years or so, it seems to be getting a little bit easier. Hopefully that'll continue. I mean, I'm sensing a lot of that has happened under the Modi administration, more so than before.
One last question I wanted to ask you about. A lot of US companies are trying to move away their footprints from China. Is India an alternative for them?
I can only speak to technology companies based in the US. I remember when I was at eBay, we were fortunate to have a China development center and 2 India development centers. I I think the bigger story is around, the bigger opportunity is, as companies become increasingly global, what markets, what countries provide the greatest amount of innovation potential for technology organizations?
Right.
And by that, what I mean is access to talent, the ability to increase investment with um, minimal regulation that constrains ownership of IP or innovation. And then I think the ability to um, uh, have employees sort of effectively be part of a global organization. And if I compare India and China, I can't speak to the specifics, but my sense is across all three of those, attracting foreign direct investment, control of IP, a regulatory environment that allows talent to go back and forth. I'm sensing India is probably a more favorable place to do business. I don't have any direct experience in China, but that's from prior experience. I think we would grow pretty aggressively our India-based investments before we grew our China-based investments, but I think it's for those reasons. And that's comparing India to any country, frankly, not just China.